Also, the print features allow you to easily and neatly print the data items, so it does not include like the menu tabs, so like the applicant search, menu, case management, all the way over to go to. There's just no reason to print that. You'll also see informational messages are now green. Confirmable messages, it's not shown here, but confirmable messages are now yellow. And then error messages are red. That allows you to easily identify the type of error message that you have. Any questions on the features before we move on to performance? Okay.
And the features that Paula talked about are kind of hard to show on these static screenshots. I think as you use OSMIS with a new layout, I think you'll find that the tabs are easier to work with, even though it still means you have to do all the data entry. I think moving from tab to tab is easier than it is to scroll down the screen. You'll find that some of the interactions as far as the tab itself highlighting and maybe giving you a red triangle if there's a data entry error on the tab is nice, because it will identify immediately what section of the registration or whatever screen you happen to be on needs to be changed, and will highlight the field even that has the data entry issue. So as you use it, I think you'll find it a lot more interactive and hopefully a lot more clear and even easier to use than what we had before. Okay, adult and dislocated worker performance. First of all, there's a lot about performance that hasn't been decided or defined yet. We're going to go over things the best that we can. I wish I could give you every detail and tell you every field in OSMIS that needs to be filled out in order to affect performance. The reality is that some things, like I said, haven't been defined, and we're really not to the point yet where we can tell you each and every data item that's going to be important in performance. We did give you a table, I think it's table number 8, that gives you kind of a side-by-side of what WIA performance is and what we expect it to be under WIOA. That might be helpful to refer to in the future or as we go through things. One of the most important things to remember here is that for performance, at least the way that we anticipate it, it's still going to be dependent on when you exit or when you participate, depending on the performance measure. It's really not dependent on whether or not you're one of the legacy WIA people or a carryover WIOA or a pure WIOA. You can be a legacy WIA person and be subject to a WIOA performance measure and vice versa. So for performance, it's really driven by when that person exits or when they participate. And as we go through things, especially when we look at some of the calendars at the end, I'll try and point out some examples. For PY15, we are still subject to the existing WIA performance measures. So the things that you're familiar with as far as entered employment, the performance measure goals that you have in your MWA are going to continue to be in effect for PY15. The new WIOA performance doesn't really take place, or excuse me, doesn't take effect until PY16. But as I said, you can have some people who are WIA participants that may be subject to a WIOA performance measure, or someone who's a WIOA participant that's subject to a WIA performance measure, and that's all dependent on the exit. One of their first measures is what we'll call entered employment, although I don't know if it's referred to that in the regulations. I think they just call it employment in second quarter. Right now we measure that for adults and dislocated workers in the first quarter after exit. Under WIOA, they're going to change that, and it's going to be the second quarter after exit. We assume that they will continue to look at wages through the wage record system, as well as interstate wages through the RIS, or the wage record interstate system, as the primary determinant as to whether or not somebody's employed. We're not sure about the supplemental data. I don't think that we enter on our outcome screens, but we're certainly going to presume that supplemental employment information will continue to be used to determine this now second quarter after exit employment, just like we use supplemental information for first quarter if the wage record data doesn't exist. They also have a retention measure, which right now is based on whether or not that person's employed in the second and third quarters after exit. Moving forward, it will be the fourth quarter after exit that WIOA will look at for employment retention. This is important, especially for some of our current WIA participants. As we look at the exit periods within this measure, and here in a bit, you'll see that for that fourth quarter after exit, some of those people have already exited or are exiting now and would be subject to a WIOA fourth quarter after exit entered employment measure. They do have an earnings measure. WIA looks at the second and third quarters and does an average. Under WIOA, we'll be looking at the median earnings during the second quarter after exit. We assume that they will use only wage record or interstate wage record information to determine this, but even that hasn't been decided yet. As far as the move to median earnings instead of average earnings, I think that they've decided on median earnings because outlier type of earnings don't have as much impact on a median earnings calculation as an average earnings calculation, and that might be good or bad depending on your own MWA performance. If you happen to have one person who had really high wages, they could pull up your average. Under median earnings, that really high wages only counts as one more wage or observation above that median point. So the median is basically the middle point of everyone that's in this performance cohort, and that median earnings will mean that there's the same number of people with wages below that point as above that point. So really high wages aren't going to help you as much. Really low wages aren't going to hurt you as much. So as you're doing your performance design and review, etc., you may be able to exit maybe a few more people that have really low wages under the median, because that only counts as one more observation below the midpoint, where if you had people who were making just a couple $100 in a quarter, they could have really hurt your average earnings. Does that make sense? Okay. I'm not a mathematician, so if I get the math wrong, I'll have to look to the programmers. Okay. There is a credential rate under adults and dislocated workers. It used to be under, or will continue to be under WIA, of those who are in training service and employed in the first quarter after exit, how many receive a credential by that third quarter after exit. Under WIOA, this changes. They're looking at the percentage of participants who obtain that post-secondary credential or secondary school diploma or GED within 1 year after exit from the program. A couple of big things to point out here. Under WIA, it's only those who received a training service that were subject to the credential measure. The way that WIOA is written right now, everyone is subject to the credential measure. I know with the proposed rulemakings, that was one of the main comments that I read on this, is that if you expect everyone to get a credential, it's really a disincentive to enroll anyone who's just needing job-seeking services, maybe a little bit of assistance or specialized intensive services to, well, not intensive services, but career services to help them find a job if you're not putting them into training. With the way that this is written right now, it's going to be tough to enroll people who aren't in a training activity and expect them to get a credential. Yeah, Bernice. that was one of the other comments that I remember reading, Bernice, is that people who are going into an on-the-job type of training activity maybe shouldn't be subject to this because of just what you said. Bernice's comment was if someone goes into OJT, they often don't get one of these recognized credentials. They don't get an associate's degree. They don't get maybe even an industry recognized credential type of thing. So should they be subject to this? Right now, they would be subject to it based on this definition, but whether or not that's changed when the rules come out remains to be seen. The other thing to note here, or at least I would like everyone to note related to the credential, right now under WIOA, we've allowed MWAs to have what we consider to be board recognized credentials, where your workforce board says that, in our area it's important to have this type of skill and we can train people for that, and we'll accept that as a credential. Under WIOA, those types of board recognized credentials won't be acceptable. They have to be the more, I guess, robust or substantial credentials that are issued by an educational facility, that are nationally industry recognized credentials, that are a high school diploma, that type of thing. And I don't remember the Tegel number. Krista, do you remember the Tegel number that defines credentials? 1510. So if your MWA has been in the habit of using board recognized credentials, whether that's like a career readiness certificate or something else, please review that Tegel 1510 to see what sorts of credentials are going to be acceptable, because that's what we're going to have to be dictated by. Here's a question in the back. So the question is, will that Tegel be updated, or will it under WIOA or with WIOA, or will it stand as is? For right now, I guess that's what we would refer you to as Tegel 1510. If there is a change, they may issue a change on it. I think there's a couple changes out there right now, or they may issue a brand new one. I don't know, but for now, I'd refer you to 1510. I believe so. If they're indicating there that they are valid credentials, that DOL considers to be an industry recognized credential, I would think they would still continue to be valid. So the question is, if you have like a participant who's a carryover WIOA, they started under WIA in on-the-job training, and they carry over into WIOA, will that board recognized credential for the on-the-job training still be valid? It really depends on when that person exits. If they exit in a time period that's subject to the WIA credential measure, then it would be acceptable. But if they exit in the time period where they fall into a WIOA credential measure, then no, it would not be. The other note here is related to the attainment of the high school diploma or a GED. I think the way the regulation reads is that if the person's credential is a high school diploma or a GED, that only counts if they're employed after they exit, or if they're in post-secondary training that would lead to a post-secondary credential. So that's another caveat. If you get somebody a high school diploma or a GED for this particular measure, that diploma or GED would only be counted positively as a credential if they're also employed, or if they're in post-secondary education where that education could lead to a further certificate. So this one's gotten tougher. Okay, measurable skills gain. We don't have this under WIA right now, but under WIOA, they talk about the percentage of people who are in education or a training program who achieve a measurable skills gain. toward that credential or toward employment. They can write it, but they haven't told us what it means yet. And I think this is another one that received a lot of comments in the rulemaking as to what a measurable skills gain will be. And honestly, I can't tell you what it's going to end up being defined as, because many of the comments ranged from, well, we need to be told exactly what tests we can use or assessments we can use to pre and post test everybody during a year. You know, so that seems to be pretty labor intensive to me to expect every one of your people is going to be pre and post tested. Other rules varied and said, well, it should be left to the locals to decide. If the locals decide that such and such is a measurable skills gain, it should be accepted. So there's really a wide range of what the suggested things were for this. So honestly, I don't know how to tell you to prepare for this. As we get more information, we'll certainly update, you know, the data system to collect what we need to collect, but we'll certainly try and provide information to you related to this. So my only comment on here was not sure what measurable